We'll just give a minute. We've got quite a tight time schedule today, so we'll just give it a minute for some more people to join, and then we'll get started. Welcome to all of those that have joined so promptly. Thank you so much. Okay, so we've had a minute. We've got some people joining the room, but welcome and good afternoon, everyone, to the 5th instalment of InsightHive. I'm Gail Dello. I'm a lead digital midwife, among other roles that I'll come to shortly. I'm thrilled to be talking with the EPR network members today and exploring clinical champions and super users. I'm going to let the panel introduce themselves in a moment, but first we've got some quick housekeeping things to go through. So you know what to expect on the call today. Attendees will be muted and cameras off, but please feel free to use the chat and the Q&A to share your thoughts and ideas. The HIC team will be monitoring the chat, and in 48 hours, the slides and the recording will be shared with you via email. So just a little bit about HIC, who have brought InsightHive together alongside their partners. HIC is a digital health consultancy that runs in the transformation space. They're trusted by over 70 organisations, so if you're interested in finding out more about them, please do get in touch with them. Alongside the consultancy, they also run the only EPR network in the UK, which runs specialist interest groups like maternity and neonatal. I can't even say it, but I run it because I'm the chair of that one. But we'll talk more about that later on as well. So the EPR network brings together a community of supplier organisations and NHS professionals. There'll be a QR code later on if you're interested in joining one of the specialist interest groups. With their partners, Convensis Group, they run a number of EPR summits across the UK. So please do come and join them, and perhaps I'll see you at one of them later in the year. So today we have got 3 lovely speakers that are all EPR network members. I'm looking forward to the variety that they're going to bring to this conversation. So let's get some quick introductions made before we get into the discussion. So Tracy, can you share who you are, please?
Yes, thank you, Gail. I'm Tracy McClelland. I am the Chief Clinical Informatics Officer at Alcidion. I'm a registered nurse with almost 30 years experience now across frontline clinical care, operational leadership and digital transformation in Australia and in the UK. In my current role, I work very closely with NHS organisations across the UK, supporting everything from digital strategy, clinical safety, through to implementation, adoption and benefits realisation. And a significant part of that role is helping organisations bridge the gap between technology and clinical practice, ensuring that digital systems deliver meaningful improvements. So I'm really happy to be joining the panel today to discuss the role of clinical champion. So thank you very much for inviting me.
Lovely. Gary, can you introduce yourself a bit?
Thanks, Gail. Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Gary Mooney. I'm Clinical Solution Executive for InterSystems. I started my career in academic medicine before then moving to the Department of Health, working on a range of what was then strategy delivery around the use of technology in health. I then moved from there into the commercial sector, and I've worked across the UK, Ireland, Australasia, mainland Europe as well for the delivery of digital transformations. My role currently, I'm focusing a lot on Ireland, so I'm the lead for the national transformation that's going on in the Republic of Ireland around the community care record. And my specific role in that has been to define the adoption strategy and the transformation strategy, which included the sort of the national engagement with all of the services to inform the solution configuration. And that's typically the role of what we do as a solution executive at InterSystems. So thanks for the opportunity to speak to everybody today.
Thanks. And last but not least, Joshua.
Thank you, Gail. Hi, everyone. I'm Joshua Camacho, Business Development Manager of Innovacom. We specialize in interoperability and medical device integration, and we support healthcare organizations, helping clinicians save time for quality care. And I'm delighted to be joining today's panel.
Thank you all. We've already heard some very different perspectives represented on today's panel, which is exactly what we wanted. When people talk about successful EPR programs, the conversation often starts with the technology. But time and time again, organisations tell us, alongside our experience in the room, which Tracy, I don't want to do the maths about my midwifery and your nursing, but it's coming up to half a century, which is scary. So it really, the success comes down to people, the clinicians, the trainers, the leaders, and the teams who use these systems every single day. So let's start there and explore what that actually means in practice. So I'll go straight to question 1. We often say EPR success is about people, not technology. But what does that mean in practice? And I'll come to you first, Gary.
Yeah, absolutely, Gail. And it often can sound odd coming from a technology supplier to really emphasise right at the beginning that these programs of change is not about the technology. The technology is the enabler, it's not the outcome. So we deliver and we implement the technology to deliver against that broader set of change, the benefits and outcomes from service level to frontline level, most importantly from a patient experience and outcome perspective as well. And that adoption of technology is really based upon trust, not training. So it is understanding that the success of the EPR is about having a very good organisational understanding right the way to the front line as to the value of what we're aiming to achieve, the benefits and the outcomes to the individuals, to the organisation, and really importantly to keeping top of mind in our heads at all time the benefit that it delivers for patients and the outcomes that it delivers in terms of better healthcare. If you look at organisational impact of success for EPRs and other digital transformations, you look at the evidence where you have problems or failures in those programs, it's very rarely that it's pinned to the technology. It's more commonly associated with organisational failings around change and engagement and motivation and really delivering that change at a human individual level as opposed to just a broader technological change.
Brilliant. Joshua, did you have something to say?
Yeah, so the same as Gary has said, we also believe that technology provides the capability, but people provides the credibility. Technology doesn't transform healthcare on its own, it's the people who do. And at Innovacom, we work with, from our experience, with healthcare organizations every day to connect systems, support digital transformation. One thing is consistently clear, is that technology can enable change, but it cannot drive it. So we can have, an organization can have the best EPR in the world, but if it doesn't fit into the clinical workflows, if staff don't trust it at some point, if they don't see the value, adoption will always be limited. So the organizations that succeed are the ones that involve frontline clinicians from the very beginning and those who listen to them. Perfect.
And Tracy, is there anything you'd like to add?
I think Joshua and Gary have covered pretty much everything. I would second most of what they've said, or everything that they've said. So you need the clinical champion to be clinically credible, emotionally intelligent, and able to pull the clinicians with them. So having somebody who's expert on the floor, who understands the clinical pathway and the workflow, to be able to take the correct language to the clinicians that are utilising the solution to ensure that that adoption occurs. Because as Gary said, adoption won't happen if the clinicians aren't embedded and empowered and believing that the solution is their solution, that they own those workflows and they own the design of the product. And I'd say technical skill is really important for the clinical champions, although it's not the sole requirement, it's not the necessity. For me, it would be passion and enthusiasm and that ability to stay calm in those difficult go-live phases, and the ability to influence culture and the culture of the organisation, that change readiness from top down and the enablement of the clinicians to be freed up to be those clinical champions and super users is really important. So it's the culture, the technology and the people and the processes. And I heard someone recently say it's not just processes, it's data. So all of those things together which help to pull the go live in and to make the adoption of the EPR successful.
Lovely, thank you. Really valuable insights there. So moving on, Joshua, could you talk about the technology burden? Because often it shifts into clinicians when systems don't align with the workflows. What does that burden actually look like day to day?
Oh, that's a very great, it's a great question. At Novacom, we often see that the burden of digital transformation is much more subtle, actually, than people realize. When the systems don't align with clinical workflows, most of the times the clinicians become the integration layer. They're the ones who find workarounds, duplicating information, switching between systems, manually entering data, or spending extra time validating information that should already be available on the systems. So a great example of what we did is the ICU project we supported at Wirral University Teaching Hospitals, where nurses were manually transcribing the data from ventilators into the EPR. Because the devices weren't integrated. So on paper, it sounds like a small task, but when you multiply that across every patient, every shift, every day, it becomes a significant burden. It takes away time from patient care and introduces the risk of transcription errors. And what was most interesting was it wasn't just solving the technical challenge through medical device integration. The real breakthrough came from involving the nurses in shaping the solution through continuous feedback, and they help determine how often the data should be captured. So yeah, for me, that's the key lesson. Technology should adapt to the clinical workflows, not the other way around.
Brilliant. And actually, what are the warning signs that an EPR is creating extra work rather than reducing it? Anyone can answer that one.
I'd say it's not necessarily going to be, as we said, it's not just that technology, it's the workflows and the training and the understanding. So if you're noting that people are constantly making workarounds for the solution, or there's multiple ways of doing the same thing, or whiteboards are still being used, or papers still being used, there's copy pasting happening frequently, I'd say that would be something to look out for in terms of optimization improvement requirements. And that's where the clinical champions can really make a difference, because they can note these workarounds and these less optimized way of working, and then advocate for the safer, simpler workflows that generally reduce the burden over time. So for me, it's highlighting them from a workflow and from an on-the-floor perspective, highlight them up, being able to see where there's trends, and then working ways of optimizing the solution that probably does already have a way of working that's more standardized and succinct.
Joshua, did you have something that you wanted to come in?
I think that the warning signs are usually visible as well, long before they appear in project reports. And we detect them by listening to the clinicians. So one of the warning signs that an EPR is, or any clinical system or a system is creating work rather than reducing it, is when we start hearing the clinicians saying, I have to enter this twice, as Tracy has mentioned, I need to keep a paper note just in case, it's quicker if I do it myself, those kind of phrases that they say. So it is actually the role of super users, clinical champions, because they're the ones who spot those issues and help organizations continuously improve.
Lovely. Gary?
I absolutely agree with everything Joshua and Tracy had said. But I think one of the key risks as well, if you haven't, through the change process, engaged in that level of understanding in detail and solution definition as to how it will impact on the front line, whether that's clinical, administrative, operational. One of the real risks is it's a bit like the patients that silently go off, and when they go off a cliff, they go quick. Is that if you've not got to that level of detail and definition, if you've not invested the time post-go live to keep up the reinforcement and the engagement with what's happening, if you've not got quality adoption metrics that you can actually see in real time what's happening across the organisation, you do run the risk of these things. The bigger things will happen. So your ED clogs up, or your discharges slow down, or your 30-day readmissions start to increase. You can see sort of big headline KPIs, but there's a whole raft of other things of unhappiness that could be bubbling and surfacing, and they will build momentum silently until they become a big problem. And they say the key mitigations is doing that work and the definition and the engagement at an individual level throughout your organisation beforehand, and making sure that feeds through to the solution definition, but really keeping a close eye on some of those more subtle considerations post go live, I think is critical as well.
Brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. So Tracy, coming to you now for the next question. Is sending out a mass email ever enough when it comes to engagement and adoption?
Yeah, that was a response I had to this question. What a dream that would be if mass emails alone could be delivered and lead to successful digital transformation. Then, how amazingly simple our jobs would be. So no, I've never had an experience of being able to send a mass communication and then people adopting a change because of that email. People have very real fears and concerns when it comes to change, and they need support and training, and particularly in healthcare where people are working under huge operational pressure. So when a new system or workflow is introduced, clinicians are often asking themselves very practical questions. How is this going to help me? Is it going to make my day harder? What happens if something goes wrong? And out of hours specifically, what's going to happen when I'm struggling at 2 a.m. and potentially the support system that's in there in the daytime is not there? What's going to happen? And that's where the clinical champions and super users can become really incredibly important. They're more likely to engage, the staff more likely to engage with the clinical champions because they're their peers. It's easier for them to engage with somebody that they work day to day with rather than raise concerns in a large classroom environment or to somebody that they may perceive as external or senior to them. So some of the strongest adoption I've seen has been where clinical teams feel genuinely listened to and they have that peer-to-peer conversation. They're able to be involved in shaping the solution, understanding the solution, and feeling that the change is happening with them and not to them. So mass communication does have a role. It helps to create awareness and consistency throughout the process of the delivery project and the go live. But on its own, it's absolutely not enough to create any meaningful behavioural change and support for clinicians on the floor.
So it's a tool in our toolbox, but
yes,
we don't just use one screwdriver. We need the whole lot.
Exactly. Well, very good analogy there, Gail.
It's a DIY week for me. So we've established that people play a critical role in EPR success. But I mean, I want to know, I'm sure you do too, who are those people that really help drive adoption and change on the ground? So we've heard clinical champions and super users, terms that many organisations use, sometimes interchangeably, but they really actually mean the same thing. So Tracy, coming back to you now for the next question, what is the difference between a clinical champion and a super user? And are these roles sometimes used interchangeably? And is that a problem?
I don't think there's a problem there at all with it being interchangeable. I think they are often used interchangeably, those titles, but they are, for me, slightly different roles. They're both very important to digital transformation. For me, a super user is someone with a strong system knowledge who can support local workflows, troubleshooting, training, and day-to-day operational questions. They tend to become a bit more of their practical go-tos on the wards. A clinical champion is often broader, so a similar role, but they help to advocate for the change itself. So they influence the culture, shape the adoption, provide the clinical leadership and bridge conversations between those frontline teams and operational leaders and the project as a whole, and the digital transformational teams. I know in practice with pressurized NHS environments, the same highly engaged individuals often end up performing both roles simultaneously. They become educators, troubleshooters, and everything in between. But I think that the roles are, technical expertise, but also, as I said earlier, those people that can nurture and support and train and keep calm under pressure. So for me, they are interchangeable. Although, if you have the capacity within the organisation, you'd be able to have both of those roles separate.
So Hadley's in the chat asked a really good question, which I'm just going to pop in here now because it feels appropriate. How do trusts agree to release time for people to become these clinical champions? Sometimes they're called digital champions or super users.
Yes, very good question. And it depends trust to trust upon the resource they have available on the wards, how big a project team they can have, whether there's the staff on the floor want to be freed up from clinical practice, if they want it to be part of their clinical practice. So it does vary upon the project. Oftentimes, especially as we go nearer to go live, you find that that's where the resource is required away from clinical practice to a larger extent. So a couple of hours a week can often work early in the project, becoming more and more away from clinical practice as you go towards the go live. And then obviously optimization. You just want to stop having clinical champions and super users once the go live's occurred. That you often would want those individuals to continue with their interest and their passion for the solution and their training and support of the clinicians after go live. I feel like I've monopolised the webinar and I should let Joshua and Gary speak a little bit.
No, not at all. Don't worry. Joshua's next on my list for a question. So Joshua, when clinicians are genuinely involved in shaping systems, how different are the outcomes?
Yes, as it's already been mentioned by my co-panelists, the difference can be transformational. One of the themes that come through consistently across successful digital programs is that clinicians don't want technology imposed on them. Sometimes some departments would choose a system imposed on the clinicians, but we don't believe that that is the right approach. Because the clinicians, they want to be part of designing how the solution will support care. When clinicians are involved early, you get solutions that reflect real-world practice. Adoption tends to happen faster as well, because people can see their input reflected in the final solution. Trust increases, resistance decreases, and importantly, you uncover issues that project teams or suppliers would never identify on their own. Again, at the Wirral ICU project, the nurses didn't just test the solutions, they actively shaped it. One of our experiences as well with Nova Hospital in Finland, the clinicians defined the workflow themselves and what kind of association in which the data will be integrated. So they are the ones who basically written the design. They challenge assumptions, suggested improvements, they help refine the way information was captured. And the result wasn't simply a successful technical integration. It was a solution that clinicians felt ownership of. I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions as well in digital transformation. People often focus on the technology capability, but the real value comes from frontline staffs when they help translate that capability into something that is genuinely improving patient care and operational efficiency. And the best digital programs aren't built for clinicians, as we say, they are built with clinicians.
And just as a following question to that, do you think having that clinician involvement at the very start improves that cultural change that's needed to go from an analog way of documentation to a digital one? And that can be anybody on the panel that can answer that.
Yeah, I'd say that when clinicians are involved early, systems tend to align better to real workflows. So you'll often find if you're going from a very, very paper-heavy trust, if you're helping them, supporting them going digital, they will usually want in the first instance to digitize whatever paper process they have, and they'll be quite attached to the documents that they currently have. And there's nothing wrong with initially potentially doing that if it makes them feel safer and then optimizing. But you want to try and get as much in terms of data freeable, that's not free text, that's not just going to be pulling through in writing as you possibly can. So having the clinicians involved that understand the solution, but also understand the workflow and also understand the long-term plan in terms of being able to make the system as efficient as possible in terms of data flow, reporting, I think is really important and helps to make a significant difference in terms of shaping the system and the success of the product and the go live.
Gary, what are your thoughts on this?
I think if you can start a program without clinical engagement, you're probably not starting with the right foundations, because you absolutely need the clinical engagement if your change and transformation is pitched at the right level. And it's not just the clinicians, it's the broader frontline staff. I know we're focusing on clinicians today, but it's the administrative and operational side of the service delivery as well. You have to engage across the board at the frontline level. So if your program of work is set up that is optional, I would suggest your program of work is not defined at the right level, and you're building in risk from that point onwards. So yeah, absolutely, you can't get it soon enough.
So Gary, sorry, go on.
Sorry. No, I really like a model that we use to sort of formulate our thinking around change called ADKAR. So it stands for awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. So from the clinical champion perspective, it's those aspects of not just awareness. So as Trace said, the mass emails can have its place, but the research also shows that people expect communications in certain ways, in certain things from different audiences. So your mass communications might be all right from your project sponsor around this sort of the executive perspective, but your more intimate communications around what's in it for me, what does it mean for me as a clinician, what can I do differently, better, what can I do safer. Those communications they very much expect from people, their peers with clinical credibility. So it's adjusting the messages and the format and who it's coming from is really important as well. But the clinical champion, definitely those, not just awareness of what, but the desire, helping to build the momentum around what's in it for me for each of those individual persona groups, so they understand and consistently articulate. If you adopt the solution in this way, these are the benefits that you will get for you, for the service, for the patient, and having that very clear up front.
Brilliant. Thanks, Gary. So coming back to you, Gary, what skills set great clinical champions and super users apart?
So I think, as Tracy said, there can be an overlap between super users and clinical champions. But for me, the clinical champions, if we map it to the ADKAR approach, is absolutely focused on the awareness and desire. And whilst that needs an understanding of the solution in terms of benefit and outcomes and enablement, that's important. It's less important that they know what every button on the screen does. Whereas the super user who's providing, if you like, at elbow support in the run up to go live, post go live as well, they really need to know how to navigate the system, how to use the system. For the clinicians who are working against certain processes, pathways, workflows, etc. So in that way, again, mapping it back to ADKAR, the clinical champion's main focus, awareness and desire, but the super users is the knowledge and ability. Now, so there is that bit in the middle that overlaps, and one can help with the other, etc. But that's how I'd clearly differentiate it. Super users is more around the technical aspects of how to use the system, and the clinical champions is more about why they're using it. So the clinical credibility is an absolute must. They have to still wear the uniform. I think one of the risks with clinical champions is that they've seen that they've migrated into IT, that they're not as effective. So they have to be clinicians. It has to be structural, it has to be time dedicated. And typically what we'll say to clients is, if the people that we're asking for is giving you a real headache, we know we've got the right people. Because it's usually the ones that you can least spare their clinical time are the ones that are most valuable. We have to find a way to work around them. They also have to be have that translation ability, but in both directions, so they can translate the transformation program down to the front line, but then they can also translate the frontline perspectives back into the program. So they have to be articulate and clear in those communications of different focus and emphasis in both directions. And the really important one, it's a difficult job. They absorb friction. They absorb friction from the program to the front line, from the front line back to the program. So they have to have, as Tracy referred to earlier, those personal qualities in being comfortable, being able to work under pressure, and have the respect and trust of their peers and the respect and the trust of the program as well. So I think they're the key groups in terms of skills and abilities, I'd say.
So for the rest of the panel then, are the best clinical champions usually the ones most digitally skilled?
No, I mean, technical knowledge matters. It definitely matters. And I think, as Gary said, this is differentiated the super users and clinical champions. For the super users, yes, you need that technical knowledge. You definitely need it. But for me, not to be repeating what we've already said, but for me, interpersonal skills and the ability to train and support is extremely important and equally as important, as well as that clinical credibility. So the frontline teams need to trust that the person understands the realities of what they're facing in patient care, and the workflow of the patient through the units and the wards, and what it is that they need to do.
Thanks, Tracy. Joshua, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, just in the same way, I think the best champions are often the most trusted people in the room as well, rather than the most technical. And most of the times these are the clinical colleagues, because they understand the frontline realities, can communicate well, can bring their peers along on the journey. Technology can be taught. Trust and credibility are much harder to build. So I'd say the best champions are those who are most trusted.
Joshua, I can't think of a better quote than you've just said. Technology can be taught, but trust needs to be built. Yeah, absolutely. So I think one thing that's come through really clearly is that this isn't just about opening or appointing a few digital champions or clinical champions or super users and hoping for the best. The organisation that seem to get the most value are the ones where knowledge, confidence and support spread much more widely across teams. So we'll go through another set of questions now to explore that a little bit further. And Tracy, I'm going to come to you first. Can you share a bit about the work with South Tees and Martha's Rule and where peer support or clinical leadership made a real difference?
Yeah, of course. So for anyone that's not aware, Martha's Rule is where it is obviously a system that works outside of digital. It's something that helps to support patients getting a second opinion. And this was absolutely clinically led and a piece of work from the heart for the South Tees team. And one of the really important aspects of the work at South Tees was recognising that Martha's Rule was fundamentally about giving patients and their families that strong voice. And so it meant that the clinicians really led this project and this piece of work. The programme focused on supporting earlier recognition of deterioration and providing a clear route for that escalation, and not having that as a siloed piece of paper assessment, but within the digital solution that was used within our solution that was used within South Tees at the time, being able to have it at the time that you're doing the News 2 assessments and adding it on to that workflow, so that it was something that was just a second nature to the clinicians to do. What was particularly powerful was that it was not purely that technology-driven project. It was 100% led by the nursing teams, from the top down, from the CNIO, the chief nurse, and through to those digital clinical nurses, and also patient advocates. Patient advocates were involved during the process, and had a lot of input via the clinical champions through to the project. And that clinical ownership made a huge difference, because staff could see that the workflow had been designed around patient safety and the frontline realities, rather than simply sticking in an additional siloed process into something they were already doing. And that utilisation of patient advocates added a huge amount of confidence to the clinicians around the design and the powerful review of that process. And just to add, South Tees subsequently have received a HSA commendation for that work that they've done and the input that that's had and the impact that that's had on patient safety and outcomes across South Tees. And I think that really reflects not just the digital capability, but the patient safety impact of something that they've implemented themselves. So totally clinically led, clinical champion, and very senior clinician led project that's led to really positive outcomes and patient safety.
Brilliant. I mean, that's a beautiful example of when that works really effectively. So Joshua, I'm going to come to you next. Can the super user or clinical champion model help the model? Can it help improve digital literacy across organizations?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would argue also that one of the most important long-term benefits, that's the one of the most important long-term benefits of the model. When we talk about digital literacy, People often think about training, but confidence is as important as competence. Most staff don't learn from best. They don't learn best from manuals or from formal training sessions. It's when they're on the ground. They learn from trusted colleagues who understand their environment and can show them how technology helps in practice. And that is where super users and clinical champions become incredibly valuable. They create the bridge between technical teams and frontline staff. They translate digital language into clinical language, provide support in real-world situations, and help build confidence across teams.
Yeah, and interestingly, when we talk about curiosity, most clinicians have a requirement for professional curiosity when it comes to their patients and their well-beings. But how would we ensure that we apply that mindset to upcoming technologies and changes in the way that we run our services, our processes, etc.?
Was that for Joshua or for everybody?
That's for everyone. Sorry, I should have said.
Oh.
Can you repeat that question, please?
So just thinking about that curiosity, we have a professional curiosity about our patients. Especially as a midwife, we are really a nosy profession. You're not going to get out of a room without sharing your life story. So we have that clinical professional curiosity. How can we utilize that and say, actually, it's not just about your patients, but it's about the systems that you use and the processes? How can we support that with our, champions and super users?
I think that by enabling them to have the time, I think I saw a question pop up earlier about super users are basically, free additional workload, and they're getting more added onto their already busy clinical. I think a framework of being able to enable them to have, potentially looking at what is within a digital project team, what time can they have that's paid, what time can they have that's supported, giving them the time to be able to spend time with clinicians on the floor to understand the efficiencies of the solution, how actually it's going to support them, and how it's going to free them up to have more time with their patients to deliver that face-to-face care. I think there's often a fear of the solution that it's going to add additional burden, and I think historically that has been the case with some digital solutions. They have added additional burden and the silos. But if you have a system that pulls data together and can have a single unified view of all the data within the system and prioritizations, and you're able to show that at a time when patient, the nurses or the doctors or the physios or any member of the MDT has 5 minutes, quickly show them, well, this is the benefit of this product, or you're using it this way, you might want to think about using it this way, understanding. I think both Joshua and Gary have said, when there's workarounds happening or there's inefficient processes being used, pointing them towards the most efficient way of using the solution so that they actually understand the benefits that they can gain from the product. It's a constant reminder of the benefits and the ways of working, I think.
Lovely. Gary, do you want to come in?
I think investing right at the beginning of the program as well, and sometimes it can be seen as the sort of the fluffy stuff and not exciting in terms of getting on in terms of moving the technology deployment forward. But those activities, we call them discovery, but you're looking at having really clear called visioning and induction sessions, and usually from that, if your clinical champions aren't already visible, you usually start, and then customers usually know roughly because they've been involved maybe in the internal business case development, etc., and they're more vocal. But there'll also be other people that you're not expecting who pops up. But using that time to actually articulate clearly, communicate clearly, not in terms of the technology. Yeah, that's great, but really what we're aiming to achieve, what the outcomes are looking to achieve, and you're starting to build with that smaller group initially in terms of the induction and visioning, the what's in it for me, the benefits, the outcomes that you aim for, and they make it clear that the foundational starting point, and we, through the engagement and transformation, we'll use those as the foundations on which to build and further elaborate. But usually what we find is then the clinical champions who want to be in that clinical champion role really engage with that, and that's the D part of ADCAR, you start to activate those people's desire to be involved, and they sort of surface from the crowds of the clinicians as to who will be the clinical champions, and they're not always the most senior people. So the people who are credible within their peer group, that they can take people along as well. So it's investing that time up front, get your communications right, start to get that communication at your clinical champion. Early super user potentially is probably a bit too early at that stage, but certainly clinical champions and broader change champions as well. And then from that, you can start to build and establish your change agent network as well to support the clinical champions after that.
I think this reminds me of a scenario that occurred, a real life story at a previous trust where we were implementing an EPR, and one of the most vocal midwives, she'd been working in the NHS for 40 plus years, and she was more than happy to tell me that if I took away her pen and paper, she would retire. That was it, she was gone. She was really vocal about it, and didn't matter if you were the chief exec or the cleaner, you were going to get a little rant about how she wasn't going to give up her paper and pen. So what we did is we took her under our wing as digital midwives. We are the geeks of the service, and just said, you write this down 7 times. Well, if you put it here once, it actually populates it in the 7 different places you need it. And slowly she became one of our most vocal champions. So a complete 360 from I'm going to quit and retire to actually I'm going to get everybody on board. So there's a lot to say about the people in those clinical champions and super users roles, about how vocal they are in a really polite way. So go on, Gary, what were you going to say?
And so it's usually a good sign, isn't it? The people who are showing that sort of passion, engagement, who can be quite resistant. The barriers initially can often turn to be some of your most powerful and effective change champions as well.
Absolutely. So Gary, can I ask, what can organisations learn from successful EPR programmes when it comes to supporting champions and super users long term and not just a go live?
Yeah, and that's a really important distinction is post go live. You always say that the start of your journey is go live, it's not the end of your journey. Mm-hmm. And where you really learn around what the digital solution can do for your organisation comes through actually using it in frontline use. Where a lot of programs can, within a business case, they'll resource up to go live, and then it will fall off a cliff pretty quickly after hypercare. So it's making sure that continuous reinforcement and engagement, and that requires as much as pre-go live as it is post-go live, that role for clinical champions to work with the organisation, with their peers. Suppliers need to do it as well, and make sure that the supplier remains fully engaged as solutions evolve, as the changes in care delivery and regulatory requirements change as well. It needs to continue, and that's within ADCAR, that R at the end reinforcement is why that's there, is that needs to be engaged for the long term in terms of ongoing continuous improvement, the optimization, quantification as the benefits and outcomes that were anticipated. Are they being delivered? Is the adoption being delivered, not just volume of use, but quality of use, and really looking at those quality adoption measures to see whether, well, maybe the configuration is not quite right. This is what we anticipated, but in the real life, it needs fine tuning or changing, or maybe there's been a training issue as well. So it's those long-term engagement post go live that's really critical. I put in the chat before in terms of for clinical champions, it's making that role, we say structural, not voluntary. So it means it is part of somebody's role and not just for the length of the program, or if it is for the length of the program, it makes sure that there's continuity from maybe people that will come from the change agent network as well. People move on, people get, it's a high pressure role. So people may only want to do it for a period of time, but it's making sure that that's continuity of the role for the long term as well. And that building that community is really important to make sure that that's an infrastructure that is supported, maintained, and has a real influence on the shape of the solution going forward in terms of optimization and continuous improvement as well. So yeah, it's resourcing, make sure at the point of go live, it's really understood that that's the start of your digital transformation for the long term at that point.
I mean, I can't let that pass without one of my favourite analogies. It happens to be one of my favourites because I'm a midwife. So if you look at an EPR programme as being like a pregnancy, so your discovery is your preconception care. Your pregnancy is whilst you're running the project with all those specialists to prepare for go live, aka birth. And as we all know, if we've had children, birth is the start of an 18+ year journey of much harder things to come. So your EPR implementation is like having a baby. Your go live is just the start. And if you don't fund and properly resource that optimization period, not saying it's going to be 18 years long, but hopefully if you have a good relationship, then maybe you really need to invest in that child's future.
I always wanted a large family. I love that.
It's a great analogy.
Thank you. So we've covered a lot of ground in a relatively short space of time, from engagement and adoption through to champions, culture and long-term sustainability. So I'm just going to have a look at it. We've had some great questions in the comments. I think I'll start with Danielle, where she said, in her opinion, super user has become a term that represents unpaid extra work for a lot of frontline clinicians. You always recruited super users by volunteering or any other way? Great question.
I think,
how do we recruit?
I think, that it does depend. We know the NHS is highly resource deficient at the moment from multiple aspects. So it does depend upon the trust resource capabilities to what they can do. We would, the gold standard would be to have protected time, that it's a role that's celebrated, because whether we like it or not, digital now is a part of clinical practice. It's everywhere, and we need to be able to utilize it. So these roles are extremely important. So if a trust is able to, then through protected time, ongoing development, and making sure this is something that's aspired to, people want to be in these roles, because first of all, I think, as Gary said, we want people that are passionate. But if you're not necessarily confident necessarily in digital, that it's something that you could still do by having some ongoing support and training, and then being involved in optimization and constant governance and that benefits realization work, so you can actually believe and see what's happening in terms of improvements from any of the digital solutions that are throughout the organizational ecosystem.
Yeah, Gary, did you have anything else to say on that for Danielle?
I agree with everything that Tracy's just said. The other, and it'll depend upon the solution that you're implementing and your sort of geographic location as well. But another model that we've used, which is can be quite effective, we're currently using it in Ireland as well, as the sort of the pay it forward model, where if you've got, say, a phased deployment, maybe across a healthcare region, or even within a single ICB, if you're doing an incremental deployment, there will be teams of people who will have either clinical or even operational knowledge and experience of the system that they can help with the next service that's taking it along as well. So that sort of pay it forward model, which can help reduce the disruption then on the service that's adopting the solution as well. So it's always worthwhile, I think, talking to suppliers as well to see whether there's that option with from their existing customer base, or say if it's within a healthcare region within your own NHS ICS structure as well.
That's really a really good thing. I have experienced pay it forward, and I'm hoping to use it in an implementation I'm involved in at the moment. I think just linking this back to the education discussion yesterday about EPR programs and training, that I know in our workforce we have practice development midwives, we have practice development nurses, we have educators for our medical staff. Do you think they have a role in clinical champions and super users? That's for anybody rather.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, absolutely, you need people that are able to support training. So any of the training people, as long as they're still clinically facing and they're working on the units, absolutely. And also, I think as part of the overall deployment team, you need the clinical champions, the change agents, and also those people that are competent and confident in training, whether it be classroom-based training, on the unit training, or supporting those clinical champions with how to support on the ward with training and education should things come up. Having training within the solution potentially, and having those sort of snippets that you can have on the desktop and their laptop devices. So absolutely, I'd say they have a role within the clinical champion teams.
Mm. Gary, did you have something to add?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's where they can help with going back to ADCAR again, the K and the A. You can have pure training, which helps with the knowledge. I know which buttons to click, I know how to navigate around the screens. The layer on top of that, then the ability is how do I incorporate that into my day-to-day working, where it's not always possible to anticipate every clinical scenario that's presented with you that you can cover within a training. So that's where those sorts of roles can help as well, layer in the ability and capability as how you take that system knowledge and to broad process level knowledge to be able to layer it into the day-to-day unpredictable nature of healthcare delivery.
And I think there's one more aspect that we probably haven't touched upon in relation to super users and education, because they are so closely aligned. But these are our future clinicians, so those that are currently at university studying one of many healthcare courses. I know from discussions with those senior lecturers that they spend so little time on documentation, and if they do, it's going to be a bit of paper in a classroom. How do we as suppliers and organisations and trusts and project teams incorporate the education of future clinicians? What are your thoughts, Joshua?
I think, I mean, as suppliers, it doesn't only end on the training side and providing documentation. One thought that I had in mind a while ago, post go live, for example, is the phase of hypercare, where again, as Gary and Tracy have said, it doesn't end with the training itself. It's really about monitoring and looking if they don't go back to their own habits. Post go live, it's really to make sure that the training is applied and maintained. I mean, that's from a point of view as technology supplier.
Lovely. Gary. Sorry, Tracy, you come in first.
Get me jumping in as per usual. Yeah, I would just say, but in terms of those at university, so student nurses, student doctors, student midwives, having a supplier environment in the university campus is really helpful. As I said, digital is part of clinical life now. It is something that you need to be confident and competent in. So getting them used to a system, to documentation, to looking for alerts and communication and how to utilize different, whether it's handheld or desktop solutions, and communicating on those, I think is really important. And then including them as part of the project team. So they're, having them as potentially clinical champions. I've had so many student doctors, nurses come to me at conferences, interested in wanting to try the solution and talking about how they can get involved in digital. They still want to continue with their clinical career, but they're really interested in digital because they understand it's going to help them in terms of efficiency in their clinical practice.
Absolutely. Gary, come on in.
It's a really pertinent subject for me. I started my career in academic medicine. I had hair back then, so it's quite a while ago. But we introduced the first problem-based learning medical curricula in the UK, and part of that was a clinical skills laboratory. Now, back in the days, we were worried particularly about clinicians having even basic communication skills and basic clinical skills, and making sure they could wash their hands properly and all that sort of stuff. Digital needs to be laid into that. I would very much like to see that they have, you've probably heard of OSCEs, the objective structured clinical examinations that they do. I think digital should be part of that. So not only being able to communicate and perform the the consultation with the patient or the examination of the patient, but how they document that as well, and using systems to document. So I'd like to see digital as part of an integral part of OSCE, and maybe things like ambient voice as well would be an integral part of that as the technology starts to progress. But the other opportunity for medical education is with the digital systems. If you're running it in an appropriate way, where you can see the caseload that the students are also, particularly in the later years that they're going across, you have a better profile in terms of the portfolio of conditions that they've dealt with. So like rheumatic heart conditions are very rare. But you can start to break down then in terms of their case exposure and the quality of their clinical exposure before they get sent out into the NHS as well. So I think there's benefits from NHS in terms of the intake of those junior doctors coming in, but I think there's also benefits for medical education as well in having digital as more of an integral part of that process.
Brilliant. Thanks. That was really helpful, Gary, with your hat on of medical education. So thank you. But a huge thank you to all my panel members today, Tracy, Joshua and Gary, for sharing their insights and experiences. Thank you to everyone who joined us, contributed through the chat and the Q&A. That's really, really helpful for us. So if you would like to get involved, there is free to NHS colleagues. If today's discussions has sparked ideas or challenges you'd like to explore further, I'd encourage you to get involved in the EPR network and our special interest groups, where these conversations continue throughout the year. Maternity and neonatal care, paper to digital, pharmacy, AI are some of the various groups, just to name a few. These special interest groups chaired by NHS professionals and attended by NHS professionals. So scan the QR code, get involved. There are some regional events that we talked about earlier. So if you're in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland for this year, then come along. England will be again coming along probably early next year. So just watch that space. So if you're interested in joining the summits, each region of the UK, we can see in person, and also free for NHS staff. And then here are the email addresses of all the panel members today, myself as chair. So please feel free to drop us an email, or I'm sure we've all got social media, LinkedIn or something like that. So just keep in touch, and the HIC team will send out the recording of the webinar, the slides and any follow-up resources within the next 48 hours, so keep your eye on the inbox. And for those eagle-eyed of you in the chat, you'll see that Colleen also put a link to the white paper that was released a few weeks ago, which is about clinical champions and super users. So thank you for joining us. Don't forget, our last session today is at 4 p.m. and it is all around the integration gap. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we hope to see you at a future webinar or regional event. Thank you.
Thanks, Gail. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Gail. Thanks.